Lara Mitchell was a 24-year-old university student who'd always believed that hard work would be enough to overcome her circumstances. But when her mother's health takes a turn for the worse and the bills stack up higher than she could ever pay, Lara's determination is put to the ultimate test. She had never asked for help from anyone. After losing her father at a young age, Lara had taken on the role of caretaker for her mother Jessica, who had always been her rock. But the harsh reality of their financial struggles had caught up to them both. From working part-time jobs to scraping together every penny she could, Lara had always managed to get by, even if it meant sacrificing her own well-being. But when Jessica's diagnosis came in, one that required immediate, expensive medical treatment, Lara found herself with no way out. The scholarship money she had been depending on was delayed. Her part-time jobs couldn't cover both her tuition and the mounting hospital bills, and worst of all, her mother's condition was getting worse by the day. Lara had one shot left: find the money she needed or lose her mother forever. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. This helps us grow. Now back to the story. Then came the phone call that would change everything. A call that would force Lara to make a decision she never imagined she'd have to face. With her mother's condition worsening, Lara is thrust into an impossible situation. As the weight of her choices bears down on her, she will soon meet a man who could provide a solution, but at a personal cost far higher than she could ever have anticipated. And in that moment, everything she's known about herself, her dignity, and her future will be tested. Lara stood frozen in the middle of the bustling pharmacy, the harsh fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow on everything in sight. Her fingers gripped the small bottle of medicine for her mother, her heart hammering in her chest. Every beat felt heavy with the weight of what was happening. The urgency of the situation had never been clearer. Her mother was slipping away, and Lara had no way to stop it. The cashier swiped her card, and the machine beeped with an unforgiving finality. "Insufficient funds," the cashier said flatly. The words felt like a slap to her face, a cruel reminder of her helplessness. She tried again, her heart pounding, but the same message flashed across the screen. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. She couldn't afford to lose her composure. Not now. Lara's mind raced. She had no more savings, no family to turn to. She had already called every relative, every friend she could think of, and received nothing but excuses or cold silence. The hospital had given her a deadline. If she couldn't come up with the money for the treatments, they would have no choice but to stop her mother's care. She felt the weight of her mother's life pressing down on her. Each breath her mother took a reminder of what was slipping through her fingers. The line behind her grew restless, and she stepped aside, trying to push down the panic that was threatening to overwhelm her. She glanced at the small pack of paracetamol in her hand. It wasn't much, but at least it was something. She could afford the small medicines, but it wasn't enough to save her mother. She could feel her chest tightening, the walls closing in. As she turned to leave, her eyes landed on the man standing a few feet away. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and had the kind of presence that made the air feel different around him. He was out of place in a pharmacy at this hour, and yet, there he was, casually perusing the shelves as if he didn't have a care in the world. Lara didn't expect him to notice her. She was just another girl in a crowded pharmacy, one more face in the sea of desperate customers. But then, unexpectedly, his gaze met hers. Something in his eyes, calm, curious, held her there for a moment longer than necessary. She quickly averted her eyes, ashamed of the tears threatening to fall. She didn't want a stranger to see her weakness. But then, just as she was about to leave, he spoke. "Are you all right?" His voice was low, smooth, and filled with an unusual sincerity. Lara looked back at him, unsure of how to respond. I'm fine," she managed, her voice barely more than a whisper. His gaze softened, but there was something more behind it, something that made her uneasy. "I don't mean to intrude, but you look like you could use some help." She shook her head quickly, The last thing she wanted was charity. "No, thank you," she said, her tone firm. "I'm fine. Just a bad day." He studied her for a moment, and Lara could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. He was evaluating her, trying to figure her out, and she could feel the weight of his assessment. He was someone who didn't just notice people. He saw them, and right now, she felt like he was seeing too much. The man took a step closer, lowering his voice as if to speak only to her. "I can tell you're struggling with something much bigger than a bad day. I'm Alexander Grant," he said, holding out his hand. Lara hesitated before shaking it, taken aback by his directness. Alexander Grant. The name rang a bell, but it wasn't until she looked at him more closely that she realized why. The tailored suit, the confident stance, the unmistakable aura of someone who had power and money. He wasn't just a random businessman, he was a billionaire, a self-made one at that, according to the tabloids. His family was well known, his name synonymous with success. And yet, here he was, talking to her like he was just another man in a pharmacy. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, stepping back, suddenly feeling out of place. "I don't want to trouble you." Alexander smiled, but there was a quiet understanding in his eyes. "You're not troubling me," he replied. "In fact, I may be able to help you. I couldn't help but overhear you talking to the cashier. It seems you're in a difficult situation." Lara's heart skipped a beat. She had hoped she could leave unnoticed, but now this stranger was offering help. The desperation in her chest flared again, but she pushed it down, unwilling to accept charity from someone like him. "I appreciate your kindness, but I don't need—" "I think you do," Alexander interrupted gently, his voice firm but not unkind. "I can help with your mother's treatment. I know how it feels to be caught in a situation like this." Lara's stomach twisted. Was he just another person trying to offer empty promises? Or was he serious? "You can't," she said softly, shaking her head. "There's no way for anyone to pay for the medical bills. Not in time. I'm already too late." His expression didn't change, but there was something in his gaze that softened. "I can pay for it. I'll cover the cost. But in return, there's something I'd ask of you." Lara's heart raced. The offer felt surreal. Pay for my mother's treatment? A stranger, a billionaire, was offering to cover her debts? She blinked, trying to make sense of what was happening. "I don't understand," she said, voice shaking. "Nothing complicated," Alexander said, his tone light but sincere. "I'm not asking for anything extreme. Just one night. A one-time arrangement. No strings attached. You get the money you need, and I get what I need from you. And after that, we part ways." Lara's mind spun. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. It was too much, too fast. Was this some kind of sick joke? Was he playing with her? "No," she said immediately, shaking her head. "I can't. That's not—" "You're running out of time," Alexander interrupted. "I don't want to pressure you, but I'm offering you a way out. You don't have to do anything you're uncomfortable with. I'll make the payment directly to the hospital. All you need to do is accept my help." Lara felt a wave of nausea wash over her. The desperation clawed at her throat, but she still couldn't bring herself to accept his offer. She had always managed to survive by doing things on her own. She couldn't compromise her dignity now, not for anything, not even to save her mother. But then, as her mother's frail image flashed in her mind, the weight of it all settled on her like a crushing wave. The thought of losing her mother, the only family she had left, tore at her heart. And suddenly, it didn't matter how it came. She needed this. She needed the money. I'll do it," she whispered, barely able to say the words. Alexander nodded, a look of understanding crossing his features. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I know this isn't easy, but sometimes we have to do things we don't want to in order to survive." Lara forced herself to look up at him.
After this, we won't see each other again, will we?
No, he replied, his voice steady. Once it's done, it's over. No strings. Just a transaction. Lara nodded, relief and guilt swirling together. She had made a choice, one that would haunt her in the days to come. But for now, it was the only choice she had. The night passed quickly, faster than Lara could comprehend. When it was over, she lay beside him in the hotel room, her thoughts a tangle of confusion. The physical aspect of the arrangement had been brief, almost clinical. She had expected it to be colder, more transactional. And in a way, it was. She had let herself detach, kept her emotions at bay, just as he had. But when it was done, and she lay there in the stillness, the weight of what had just happened settled in her chest. She had agreed to his terms, to a single night for her mother's survival, but at what cost? The next morning, Lara dressed quickly, not wanting to linger in the discomfort of it all. She slipped out without a word, the door clicking shut behind her. As she stepped out into the crisp morning air, she couldn't help but wonder, what kind of person does that make me? And when the reality of it all hit her, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life would never be the same again. Lara couldn't escape the feeling that something inside her had broken. It had only been a day since she had made the decision, and already she felt like a stranger in her own skin. Every moment was punctuated by the echo of Alexander's words, no strings attached. But now, sitting alone in her small, cluttered apartment, they felt like lies, or at least like half-truths. She tried to focus on her textbook, her final exams looming over her like an insurmountable mountain. But the words blurred before her eyes. Each chapter she attempted to read felt disconnected from her reality. She couldn't concentrate. Her mind kept returning to the night she'd spent in that hotel room with Alexander, his calm demeanor, the way he'd treated her like an object of business. And yet, his gaze had lingered, just for a second, when he said goodbye. Was it just me? Or was there something else? It wasn't that she regretted the deal. Her mother, Jessica, was still in the hospital, her health slowly improving thanks to the money Alexander had provided. Lara would never let herself regret that. But the guilt gnawed at her, like a persistent shadow following her every step. She had traded her dignity for a price. She knew it. She knew what she'd done, what it meant, even if she had never spoken it aloud. She had used him, and in doing so, she had betrayed herself. Lara's eyes drifted to the window, where the soft morning light illuminated her cramped apartment. The world outside moved on, unaffected by her turmoil. Life was happening for everyone else, and yet here she was, living in a prison of her own making. The weight of her actions was suffocating, and the room felt smaller with each passing minute. A soft buzz from her phone startled her. It was a message from an unknown number. "We met yesterday. If you need anything else, don't hesitate to reach out." Her heart skipped a beat. The words were unmistakable. It was Alexander. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She had expected it, maybe even feared it, but to see his name in her messages felt like another betrayal. The agreement had been clear. He'd helped her mother in exchange for a one-night arrangement. Nothing more, nothing less. But now, he was offering more. Was this part of the deal? Or was it something else? She stared at the screen for what felt like hours, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Should she respond? Was it appropriate to reach out again? She had nothing left to say to him, nothing she could ask for, but the message felt like an invitation, one that came with no rules, no boundaries. It seemed simple on the surface, but Lara's mind raced with the implications. She had been living her life on the edge, scrimping and saving every penny to care for her mother, and now, in the space of a single night, she had crossed a line that might not be easy to step back from. Her pride, her sense of self, all of it had been handed over on a silver platter in exchange for the one thing that mattered most: her mother's survival. The phone buzzed again. "I'll be in town for a few more days if you want to meet. No pressure. Just thought I'd extend the offer." Lara swallowed, the pit in her stomach deepening. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about something else. Something she didn't want to confront. Not now, not ever. But there it was. The unspoken truth. She was tangled up in something far beyond her understanding. She placed the phone face down on the table and stood up, pacing the small apartment, her thoughts spiraling. She could feel the walls closing in, her guilt turning to shame. She couldn't bear to be caught in this web, yet it felt like there was no way out. Later that afternoon, Lara found herself in the hospital, sitting next to her mother's bedside. Jessica had been awake for the past few hours, her health stabilizing after the surgery. The doctors were hopeful, but Lara wasn't sure if they were speaking to her or to themselves. She had been holding her mother's hand, listening to her steady breathing, when Jessica's weak voice broke through the quiet. "You've been so strong, Lara," her mother whispered, her tired eyes meeting Lara's with a softness that made Lara's throat tighten. "You're doing so much for me. I wish I could do more for you, too." Lara tried to smile, but it felt like a thin mask. She swallowed hard, her emotions threatening to spill over. "You're doing all you need to, Mom. Just being here is enough." But it wasn't enough. Nothing had ever felt like enough. The words lingered in her mind, unspoken. "I had to do something terrible to save you." She wasn't sure why she was still holding back the truth. Maybe it was out of love. Or maybe it was because she couldn't face the shame in her mother's eyes when she learned what it had cost Lara to save her life. Jessica squeezed her hand, oblivious to the storm of guilt that raged inside her daughter. "I just wish I could be the mother I used to be, Lara. I hate that you've had to carry so much." "I've never minded," Lara whispered, her voice tight. "You've always been there for me, Mom. Now it's my turn." It was a lie, and Lara knew it. But what else could she say? Her mother was sick, and for the first time in her life, Lara didn't have the strength to lie to herself. The weight of what she had done hung between them, but Lara couldn't bring herself to face it. Not now. Not like this. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, schoolwork, and long nights spent staring at the ceiling, wrestling with her thoughts. Every time Lara tried to focus on her studies or her responsibilities, her phone would buzz, and her mind would wander back to that one night. To Alexander. She couldn't get him out of her head. The way he had looked at her, as if he saw right through her. The way he had made her feel like a stranger in her own life. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the transaction. It was the way he had made her question everything she had worked for, everything she had built for herself and her mother. And then, there was the message. "If you need anything, I'll be here." Lara wasn't sure how to interpret it. Was it just a polite gesture? Or did he mean it? Did he see her as more than a poor girl he helped for a night? Was it possible that, despite everything, he actually cared about her? Or was she just another one of his fleeting encounters, another pretty face in the crowd? The guilt weighed on her every waking moment. She had used him. She had allowed herself to be used. But in her desperation, hadn't she done the same thing before? Wasn't she just using him to get what she needed, just like he had used her in return? She felt sick. The next morning, Lara received another message from Alexander. "I'll be in town tomorrow. I can help with anything you need. If you're free, let me know." The message was straightforward, but there was an undertone that unsettled her. She didn't know what he wanted, but part of her feared what it might be. For the first time, Lara considered blocking his number. But something stopped her. Her heart ached with longing, with confusion. She couldn't let go of the possibility that he might be offering something real. But was it worth the price? Lara sat down at her desk and buried her head in her hands. She had been so sure of herself before all of this, so certain of her decisions, her boundaries, her place in the world. But now, it all felt so fragile. The only thing that kept her going was the fact that her mother was still alive. Jessica was still here, and Lara had done what she had to do to keep it that way. But at what cost? And the more she thought about Alexander, the more she realized she wasn't just questioning her actions. She was questioning him too. Had he seen her as a charity case? A way to get something from her in return? As Lara stared at her phone, the weight of the decision before her seemed insurmountable. Could she reach out again? Could she accept his help once more, knowing the personal cost? But one thing was clear. No matter how much she wanted to forget, no matter how much she tried to push him away, Alexander Grant was a part of her life now, and the story between them was far from over. Lara hadn't expected to hear from him again. Not really. She had half expected the messages to stop after their brief interaction, the one-night arrangement that had saved her mother's life, or at least given her a fighting chance. Alexander had made it clear that it was a transaction, an exchange with no strings attached. But there it was again, another message from him, one that left her heart racing for all the wrong reasons. I hope your mother is doing better. If you ever need anything, I'm here. His words were simple, but something about them felt different this time. It wasn't the same cold, detached offer of help. This one was laced with something else. Was it care, sympathy, or something deeper, something that scared her to acknowledge? She stared at her phone for a long moment, the weight of her indecision pressing down on her chest. Should she reply? Should she ignore it and move on? Lara had told herself to stay away from him, to let the one-night encounter be exactly that, one night. She had made her peace with it. Her mother was recovering. Everything was supposed to go back to normal. She didn't need Alexander's help anymore. She didn't need him. But as the days wore on, it became harder to ignore the gnawing curiosity, the questions that lingered in her mind. What did he mean by offering to help again? Was he genuinely concerned about her, or was it just another casual gesture to him? She wasn't sure she could take another brush off, another reminder of how different their worlds were. The message sat there like a weight, too heavy to ignore. After a long pause, she typed a simple reply. Thank you. My mother's doing better, thankfully. I appreciate your offer, but we're managing now. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Minutes passed, but no reply came. Lara shoved the phone into her bag, trying to focus on her notes for an upcoming exam. But she couldn't concentrate. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Alexander. What was it about him that made her feel so unsettled? Why did his message affect her more than it should? That evening, when she least expected it, her phone buzzed again. I'm glad to hear she's recovering. I don't mean to intrude, but if you ever need a break, or if you'd like to talk... The message ended abruptly, but Lara had already seen enough. Her stomach tightened. There was something in those words that made her feel vulnerable, like she was being drawn into something deeper than she had planned. She thought about ignoring it, pretending she hadn't seen it, but part of her couldn't resist. She wrote back, I'm doing fine. I don't want to bother you, but thank you for checking in. This time there was no hesitation in her fingers. The words felt final, even though they didn't truly reflect how she felt. The phone sat still for a long time, and Lara was almost relieved. Until, an hour later, a call came through. It was Alexander's number. Lara's heart skipped. She stared at the screen, her hand hovering over the decline button. What was he going to say? Was he calling to pressure her? To try to get her to meet him again? No, she whispered to herself, almost convinced. But something held her back. She had to pick up. She didn't know why, but she did. Hello? Her voice was almost a whisper. Lara. Alexander's voice came through, smooth and calm. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Lara's breath hitched. The sound of his voice was like a magnet, pulling her in despite her better judgment. No, not at all. I was just studying. Good, he said, the brief pause in his voice making her stomach flip. I wanted to check in. I know things have been hectic for you, but if you ever need to talk or take a break, I'm happy to listen. You've been through a lot. Lara's chest tightened. She had expected this to be another awkward exchange, but there was something in his tone that made her feel as though he genuinely meant it. His voice wasn't cold or detached, like it had been the night they met. It wasn't an offer to help in exchange for anything. It was simply kindness. I don't know what to say, she murmured. I wasn't expecting you to reach out again. There was a brief silence before he responded. I don't make a habit of following up on people, but after what you've been through, I felt like I should. I don't want to make you uncomfortable, Lara. I'm not expecting anything. I just feel like I owe it to you to check in. She was silent for a long moment. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for the first time, she let herself consider the possibility that he wasn't just trying to buy her silence. He wasn't just a rich man offering charity. There was something more in the way he spoke, in the way his words seemed to linger. Thank you, she said softly. I don't really know what to make of all this. Alexander gave a small chuckle on the other end, and Lara could almost hear the smile in his voice. Neither do I. But maybe that's the point. Sometimes we just have to let things happen. She felt a strange sense of warmth at his words, something she hadn't expected to feel. It wasn't pity or guilt or anything transactional. It was genuine concern. Over the next few days, Lara couldn't get Alexander out of her mind. She tried to push the thoughts aside, to focus on her schoolwork, on the fact that her mother was getting better. She tried to remind herself that she didn't owe him anything, that their interaction had been nothing more than a business deal. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, the tall, composed man who had looked at her like she mattered. She had seen him as just another wealthy businessman, a man whose world was far beyond hers. But now, she wondered if there was more to him than the reputation that preceded him. Lara knew she was growing attached, even if it was just emotionally, and that terrified her. The next time she heard from him was unexpected. A simple text message, no pressure, no strings. If you're free, I'd like to take you out for coffee. Just to talk. No strings, no expectations. Her first instinct was to say no, to push him away before things got more complicated. But something in her heart whispered to give it a chance. Maybe he wasn't like everyone else. Maybe he was someone who understood what it meant to be trapped by circumstances. Lara stared at the message, then typed out a response. Okay, coffee sounds good. That evening they met at a small cafe. The conversation was easy at first. They talked about school, about business, about life in general. But as the evening wore on, the conversation took a more personal turn. I know you don't trust me, Alexander said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. And I get it. I haven't exactly made things easy for you. Lara looked at him, startled. What do you mean? I mean this whole situation. You're probably wondering why I'm still here, why I keep reaching out. Honestly, I don't have a good answer. But I feel like you're different from the women I'm used to. I can't explain it, but something about you makes me want to be a better person. Lara's heart fluttered at his words. She had heard men say similar things before. But there was something sincere in the way Alexander spoke, something real, and it was making her feel something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. I'm not used to this, Lara admitted, her voice quiet. I don't trust people easily. Alexander nodded, his expression softening. I get it. But maybe you can trust me. Maybe we can start with that. For the first time, Lara let her guard down. She didn't know what the future held, but for that moment, she allowed herself to be open to the possibility of something more, something real. As the evening came to a close, Alexander walked her to her car. He didn't try to kiss her, didn't try to press her into anything she wasn't ready for. He simply smiled, his eyes warm. "Thank you for giving me a chance to show you who I am," he said quietly. "I hope we can do this again soon." Lara smiled, feeling the weight of the past few days begin to lift. "I'd like that." As she drove home, her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. She wasn't sure what was happening between her and Alexander, but for the first time, it didn't matter. She had allowed herself to connect with him, to trust him, and that in itself was a step forward. The road ahead wasn't clear, but Lara was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could find something real with him. And for the first time, the future felt like it might hold something more than just survival. As Lara lay in bed that night, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a simple message from Alexander. "Good night, Lara. Sleep well." A small smile crept across her face as she put the phone down. "Good night, Alexander." Lara hadn't intended for it to happen. She hadn't planned on growing attached to Alexander, and yet, as the days turned into weeks, it was becoming harder and harder to ignore the way her heart responded when he was near. Despite her best efforts to keep things casual, something about him, his quiet confidence, the way he made her feel seen, kept drawing her in. She had never been one to shy away from her emotions, but this was different. She was terrified. Lara had spent so much of her life building walls to protect herself from pain. She'd worked hard to be independent, to stand on her own 2 feet. She couldn't afford to need anyone, least of all a man like Alexander, someone who had everything, someone who had helped her in ways that she would never fully be able to repay. But there it was, the growing ache in her chest every time he smiled at her, the way her stomach fluttered whenever their hands brushed or their eyes locked. It had been a few days since their last coffee date, and she had told herself to pull back, to keep her distance. She couldn't let herself fall for someone like him. He was a billionaire, and she was just a struggling university student. The difference in their worlds was too vast. And yet, despite her best intentions, she found herself texting him again. Just a quick message to say hello, to ask how he was. She wasn't looking for anything more, nothing more than a simple check-in. She needed to remind herself that he was just a man, not the savior of her life. But every time she heard his voice, every time he spoke to her with that rare sincerity, she couldn't help but feel a pull, a magnetic force she couldn't quite understand. As much as she tried to fight it, her guard kept slipping. Every time he was kind to her, every time he showed her a side of himself that wasn't about money or status, her walls crumbled just a little more. She couldn't deny the warmth she felt in his presence, the way he made her feel as though she mattered, not because of her circumstances, but because of who she was. That was terrifying. It made her vulnerable in ways she hadn't been in years. But as the emotional pull between them deepened, another presence began to loom on the edges of her life. Simone. Lara had heard the name before. She had heard the whispers among the staff at Alexander's company, the ones who spoke about Alexander's ex-girlfriend in hushed tones. Simone was beautiful, wealthy, and successful in her own right. She was the kind of woman who had always been at the top of the social ladder, and when she and Alexander had been together, it had been a power couple to rival any in the city. But from the moment Simone appeared in Lara's life, Lara knew she was trouble. The first time Simone's name came up in conversation, it was during a casual dinner with Alexander. Lara hadn't thought much of it at first. Simone was a part of Alexander's past, and Lara hadn't asked for the details. She didn't need to know. But then, one evening, as she was finishing up a report at the office, she overheard a conversation between 2 of the employees. "Did you hear Simone's back in town? She's already making moves on Alexander again," one of them whispered. Lara's heart dropped into her stomach. Simone? The ex-girlfriend who had never truly left his life? The woman who would always be there, a shadow, lurking in the background, ready to remind Lara of how out of place she was in Alexander's world? The more Lara thought about it, the more it bothered her. Simone wasn't just an ex. She was everything Lara was not: polished, confident, and rich. Simone was the kind of woman who could wrap Alexander around her finger with a smile, and Lara wasn't sure she had the strength to compete with that. The next time Simone appeared, it was at an event Alexander had invited Lara to, a corporate gala that was filled with business tycoons, media moguls, and socialites. It was the kind of event where Lara felt like she was playing dress-up, a spectator in a world she didn't belong to. As they entered the venue, Lara felt a tightening in her chest. She wasn't used to being in places like this, surrounded by people who had lived lives of luxury and ease. She kept close to Alexander, her hand resting lightly on his arm, trying to calm the nerves that were suddenly on edge. That's when she saw her. Simone. She was everything Lara wasn't. Tall, confident, effortlessly elegant. And she was walking toward them, a wide smile plastered on her face. The moment she laid eyes on Alexander, her expression shifted: warmth, familiarity, and a kind of possessiveness that made Lara's stomach twist. "Alexander," Simone cooed, leaning in to kiss him on the cheek. "It's been too long." Lara stiffened beside him, but Alexander didn't flinch. He took the greeting in stride, his arm subtly pulling Lara closer as he turned to face Simone. "Simone," Alexander said coolly, a polite smile on his lips. "I didn't expect to see you here." Simone's gaze flickered over to Lara, then back to Alexander. There was something in her eyes, a subtle challenge. "I didn't know you were bringing a date," she said, her voice smooth but laced with a quiet sharpness. Lara felt her chest tighten, but she forced herself to smile. She had to. This was just another part of the world Alexander inhabited, a world that she could never truly be a part of. A world where Simone still held a place in his heart, whether he admitted it or not. Simone's eyes lingered on Lara for a moment longer than necessary, as if sizing her up, assessing her place in Alexander's life. Then, with a casual flick of her hair, Simone turned back to Alexander. "You've been busy, I see. It's good to see you're doing well," she said, her tone dripping with meaning. Lara felt the sting of insecurity wash over her. Was that what this was all about? Was Simone still trying to stake a claim on him, to remind Lara that she would never measure up? The rest of the evening felt like a blur. Simone's presence loomed over them, and Lara felt like an outsider in her own skin. The warmth Alexander had shown her just days ago seemed distant now, replaced by the cool, polite facade he wore when dealing with his ex. He didn't seem bothered by Simone's antics, but Lara felt every word, every glance, as if they were sharp knives aimed at her heart. By the end of the night, Lara could feel the tension rising between them. Simone had made her mark, leaving Lara to wonder if she was just another fleeting distraction in Alexander's life, a casual fling that could never compare to the woman he had once loved. Later, when they were alone, the silence between Lara and Alexander was thick, heavy with unspoken words. They had been driving back to her apartment, but the tension in the air was unbearable. Lara finally broke the silence. "Is she still a part of your life?" Alexander glanced at her, his jaw tightening slightly. "Simone? No. She's just someone from my past." "But she still thinks she has a place in your life, doesn't she?" Lara's voice was barely above a whisper, but it was sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. Alexander's eyes flashed with something: anger, frustration. But he didn't speak right away. He focused on the road ahead, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. When he spoke, his voice was low. "Lara," he said softly, "you don't need to worry about her. You're the one I want to be with." Lara's heart skipped, but her fear still held her back. "It doesn't feel like that. It feels like I'm just another distraction for you." He didn't respond immediately. The car rolled to a stop in front of her building, the engine idling as the weight of his words hung in the air. Lara sat still, her hands trembling in her lap. Alexander finally turned to her, his eyes softening. "I've told you before, I'm not looking for a casual fling. I'm not playing games," he said, his voice firm. "I want more than that with you, Lara. But I can't make you feel the same way." Lara's heart raced. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to reach out to him, to believe that maybe he was telling the truth, that maybe he did feel something real for her. But the other part of her, the part that had been hurt before, the part that had been abandoned by her father and now had a mother who was barely clinging to life, was too scared to take the risk.
"I don't know if I can trust you, Alexander,"
she whispered, her voice barely audible.
"I don't know if I can let you in."
The words felt like a weight, like she had just opened up a wound that she wasn't sure she could heal. But she had to say them. She had to admit it to herself. Alexander reached out, his hand gently touching hers. "You don't have to trust me right now, but I'll prove it to you. One day at a time." Lara closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the whirlwind of emotions. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain. Alexander Grant was no longer just a businessman in her life. He had become something much more complicated, and she wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. But for the first time in days, Lara allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a fleeting moment. Maybe this was the beginning of something more. But deep down, she feared the cost. Would the price of trusting him be too high? Lara hadn't expected it to be this difficult. It had only been a few days since she and Alexander had last spoken, and yet it felt like an eternity. The space between them had grown, the silence hanging heavy in the air. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, the way he'd looked at her with such warmth and sincerity. But with every memory, there was also the gnawing ache of doubt, the constant reminder of why they could never be together. The differences between them were too great, too insurmountable. He was a billionaire. She was a struggling university student with a sick mother. They lived in two separate worlds, worlds that didn't mix. She couldn't shake the feeling that, no matter how hard she tried, she would always fall short of his expectations. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that maybe he deserved someone who could meet those expectations, someone who could truly stand beside him without the constant fear of not measuring up. The thought tore at her heart, but it was the truth. And so, she had made a decision that felt like a weight on her chest, but one she had to make. She had to push him away. It was a Saturday afternoon when Alexander called her for the first time in a week. Lara had been sitting on her bed, working on her assignments, but as soon as the phone buzzed, she froze. The name on the screen, Alexander Grant, was enough to send her heart racing, but she couldn't pick up. Not now. Not after everything. She let it ring out. The guilt was instant. It washed over her like a cold wave, but she forced herself not to pick up. He didn't deserve to be pushed away, not like this. But she couldn't risk it. She couldn't let herself fall deeper into this connection, not when she knew it would never work. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. "Lara, we need to talk. I miss you. I know things have been complicated, but I think we can figure this out." Her heart twisted painfully. She stared at the message, her hands trembling. Why do you have to be so damn understanding? Lara didn't know what she wanted anymore. Part of her wanted to reach out to him, to tell him how much she wished things could be different. But the other part of her was terrified that if she let herself get too close, she'd lose herself entirely. She'd lose her independence, her sense of self, and she wasn't sure she could handle that. A part of her wondered if he was just saying all the right things. Maybe he just didn't want to feel guilty for what had happened between them. Maybe this wasn't real for him. Maybe he just wanted to fix everything with the same ease he fixed his business deals. But even as she thought it, she knew it wasn't true. She knew there was something real between them, something deeper than just their one-night arrangement. But the question remained, did it matter? Did it matter if they were both in love, if the world between them was so vast, so impossible to bridge? 2 days later, Alexander showed up at her door. Lara had been trying to avoid him, avoiding his calls, his texts, anything that would bring them back together. But now, here he was, standing on her doorstep with a determined look in his eyes. Her heart hammered in her chest as she stood frozen at the entrance, unsure of what to say or do. She had prepared herself for this moment, told herself she would send him away, but in his presence, everything she had planned seemed to slip away. "Lara," he said quietly, his voice laced with something between concern and frustration. "We need to talk. I'm not leaving until we do." Lara wanted to say something, wanted to tell him that it was better this way, that they could never be what he wanted, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she stepped aside, letting him enter. She led him to the small living room, where the afternoon light filtered in through the window, casting a warm glow over everything. It felt wrong to be here with him, alone in this space. She didn't want to confront him, didn't want to let him in, but she also didn't want to let him walk away without a fight. "Sit," she said softly, motioning to the couch. He didn't sit immediately. Instead, he lingered by the window, his back to her as he seemed to gather his thoughts. Lara watched him, her heart aching as she remembered the man he had shown her, someone who had cared, someone who had genuinely tried to understand her. But now, standing in front of her, he seemed like a stranger, a reminder of everything she had to give up in order to keep her own dignity. "I've been thinking about us," Alexander said finally, turning to face her. "And I know things between us started differently. But Lara, I'm not that person anymore. I don't want this to be a fling. I don't want you to think of me like that." Lara's chest tightened. "I know you don't want that," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But it's not just about you. It's about me, too. I don't know if I can keep doing this. I can't keep pretending that I'm okay with everything between us." "I'm not asking you to pretend," he replied, his tone gentle but firm. "But you're not the only one with doubts. I'm not perfect, Lara. I've made mistakes, but I know I don't want to make another one with you. This isn't just about the money or what happened between us that night. It's about what's real." Lara stood up abruptly, walking over to the window. She needed space, needed air, to make sense of everything he was saying. "I don't know what's real," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "I've always had to rely on myself. I've always had to figure things out on my own. And now you're telling me that I need to let someone else in. I'm not sure I can do that. I don't know if I can trust you. Or anyone, for that matter." She paused, her breath catching. "I can't keep doing this, Alexander. I'm not good at this. I don't know if I'm cut out for this kind of relationship." He took a step forward, closing the distance between them. His hand gently touched her shoulder, and she tensed under his touch. "I don't expect you to trust me right away, but I'm asking for a chance. I'm asking for us to try." Lara turned to face him, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm scared of getting close to you. I'm scared that I'll lose myself in all of this. I don't know if I can be what you need." Alexander's gaze softened, his expression filled with understanding. "You don't have to be perfect, Lara. You don't have to be anything but yourself. That's what I want. I just want to be with you." Her mind was spinning, her emotions caught in a storm. She had spent so long trying to protect herself, trying to keep her heart locked away. But in this moment, in his presence, it felt like everything she had fought for was slipping away. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't a bad thing. She stepped closer to him, her breath shaky. "What if I don't deserve you?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Alexander gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing away the tear that had fallen from her eye. "Lara," he said softly, You deserve everything good in this world. And I want to be the one to give that to you. I don't care about your past or your mistakes. I just care about you." She closed her eyes, the weight of his words sinking into her heart. She had been running for so long, afraid of what might happen if she let herself feel anything. But now, standing here with him, she realized that maybe it was time to stop running.
"I don't know if I'm ready,"
she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to be," he replied, his voice steady and reassuring. "But I'm here, whenever you are." And in that moment, Lara realized that for the first time, she wasn't alone. She didn't have to carry the weight of the world by herself. Maybe she didn't have all the answers, and maybe she didn't have the courage to take the leap just yet. But for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have the future she had always dreamed of. And with Alexander by her side, maybe she didn't have to be afraid anymore. Lara sat at the edge of her mother's hospital bed, her fingers lightly tracing the pattern of the sheets. The steady beep of the heart monitor was a comforting rhythm, a sound that had become synonymous with her mother's slow but sure recovery. Jessica's color had returned, and the once fragile frame that had lain in bed for weeks had regained some of its strength. It was a far cry from the hollowed, feverish figure Lara had feared she might lose forever. The doctors were optimistic now, but Lara still carried the weight of the past weeks with her, the haunting memory of what it had taken to get here. And then, there was Alexander. His presence in her life was still new, still tentative, but the more she saw him, the more she felt herself softening, allowing him to fill the space she had carefully kept closed off. They hadn't rushed into anything. He respected her pace, something she hadn't realized she needed until now. They met often, shared long conversations, went on simple, quiet dates, and talked about everything from their hopes and dreams to their scars and fears. Slowly, but surely, they were rebuilding something real. But with each new step forward, another shadow of doubt crept in. Could she truly let him in? Her heart was still torn between the person she was, the independent woman who had fought tooth and nail to get here, and the woman she was becoming, the woman who had started to rely on someone else. Lara had spent so long being the one who was always strong, always the one who had to hold things together. But now she was learning that maybe, just maybe, it was okay to let someone else carry some of the weight. But it wasn't easy. That night, as Lara sat at her desk, the glow of her laptop casting shadows in the dark apartment, her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Alexander. "Hey, how's your mom doing? I've been thinking about you both. If you need anything, I'm here." Lara smiled at the message. Simple, to the point, no pressure, just an offer of support. But as she read the words, the familiar knot of guilt twisted in her stomach. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate his help. It wasn't even that she didn't want to be with him anymore. It was just the guilt. The reminder that, no matter how much she cared about him, their worlds were still vastly different. "She's doing better. Thanks for checking in. It means a lot." Lara sent the message quickly before she could second-guess herself. She knew she was still figuring things out, but she wasn't ready to talk about it. Not yet. The phone buzzed again almost immediately. "I'd like to see you tomorrow if you're free. Maybe we can go for a walk?" Lara bit her lip, her fingers hovering over the keys. She hadn't expected him to be so eager. It was clear that his feelings for her were growing stronger, and with each passing day, he seemed to inch closer to the man he had promised he would be. But she couldn't ignore the weight of her own fears. Was she ready for this? She stared at the message for a long time, feeling the pull of his words, the softness of his care, but also the fear that swirled in her chest. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to be with him. But every time she allowed herself to get closer, the old, familiar fear came rushing back. She finally typed, "I'd like that too. Let me know the time." It wasn't a big step forward, but it was something. Small, measured, safe. The next afternoon, Lara met Alexander at a small park near the edge of the city. The sun was warm, the air crisp, and the leaves rustled gently in the wind. It was the kind of day that made her feel alive, made her feel like everything could be okay. Alexander was waiting for her by the entrance, his hands in his pockets, his eyes scanning the crowd. When he saw her, he smiled, a soft, quiet smile that made her heart skip. He had a way of making everything seem calm, like the chaos of the world could fall away when he was near. "You look good," he said, his voice easy, warm. Lara smiled, her nerves easing a little. "Thanks. You too. How's everything?" "Busy as usual," he replied. "But I'm making time for this. For you." Lara's heart fluttered at his words. She didn't know why it still surprised her that he made time for her. She had never been the kind of person who expected things to be easy, and yet here was Alexander, making her feel like she mattered. They walked side by side along the winding path, the world around them seeming to fade as their conversation deepened. They spoke about their childhoods, about dreams and disappointments. Alexander had grown up in the lap of luxury, but it hadn't been easy for him. His parents had always been distant, cold. He'd spent his youth trying to live up to an ideal he could never reach, trying to prove to them, and to himself, that he was worthy of their love. It wasn't until much later that he realized he didn't need their approval. He didn't need anyone's approval. Lara listened intently, feeling a strange sense of kinship. She had never had the wealth or the luxury Alexander had, but she understood what it meant to live for someone else's approval. Her mother had always been her driving force, and Lara had often sacrificed her own needs to take care of her. She opened up about her own childhood, the loss of her father, the way she and her mother had struggled to make ends meet. She told him about the long nights spent studying while her mother worked late hours, the way she had been forced to grow up too quickly. She had always felt like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, and only recently had she begun to understand that maybe she didn't have to do it all alone. "You don't have to," Alexander said, his voice soft but firm. "You don't have to carry everything by yourself, Lara. You've got me. I'm here for you, if you'll let me be." Lara looked up at him, her heart full of something she didn't know how to name. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper, something she was afraid to acknowledge. She had never allowed herself to need anyone, had always kept people at arm's length. But with Alexander, it was different. He was different. They sat on a bench beneath a tree, the sunlight filtering through the branches. Lara's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but in this moment, she allowed herself to relax, to simply be present. And that's when it happened. It was subtle at first, a small shift, but it was there. The way Alexander looked at her, the way he reached for her hand, his fingers brushing hers in a quiet, tender gesture. His touch was warm, grounding. She didn't pull away. She didn't want to. For the first time, she realized that she wasn't just attracted to him. It wasn't just about the physical connection. She was drawn to him in a way she had never been drawn to anyone before. It was deeper than that. It was about the way he made her feel seen, understood, cared for in a way that wasn't transactional. "I'm glad you came today," he said softly, squeezing her hand. "I know things haven't been easy, and I don't want to push you into something you're not ready for. But I need you to know that I'm here. I want to be here for you, in whatever way you need." Lara's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready to let someone else in. But in that moment, with his hand in hers, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could work. Maybe they could work. "You make it hard to say no," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But I don't know if I can let myself be that vulnerable." "You don't have to," he said, his voice steady. "Not all at once. We'll take it slow. Together. As they walked back toward the entrance of the park, Lara felt a sense of calm settle over her. It wasn't the kind of calm that came from avoidance or denial. It was the kind that came from acceptance. She was beginning to believe that maybe she could trust him. And maybe, just maybe, she could allow herself to be loved. For the first time in a long time, Lara didn't feel like she was alone. She felt like she was moving toward something, toward a future she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. And that future, for the first time, included Alexander. As they said goodbye, he kissed her gently on the cheek, a soft promise lingering between them. "I'll see you soon, Lara." And as Lara watched him walk away, she realized that the future didn't seem so uncertain anymore. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something real. Lara could feel it before she even stepped into the grand estate, the weight of expectation pressing down on her shoulders, tightening her chest. The mansion stood before her, its towering columns and wide windows giving off an air of elegance, wealth, and history. She had always known that Alexander's world was far removed from her own, but standing at the threshold of his family's estate, it felt more real than ever. Tonight wasn't just any night. It was dinner with Alexander's family, a pivotal moment in their relationship. Lara had never been the kind of person who shied away from challenges, but this was different. The weight of his family's status, the legacy they represented, felt like something she could never quite measure up to. She had been invited to dinner by Alexander himself, and although she had been both honored and terrified when the invitation came, she had agreed. She had never met his family before, and she couldn't help but wonder how they would see her. She wasn't the polished, high-society woman Alexander was accustomed to. She wasn't even sure she belonged in this world. But for him, she would try. She had to try. As Alexander led her through the grand front doors, the smell of fine food wafted through the air, blending with the low murmur of voices from the dining room. Alexander squeezed her hand gently, offering her a comforting smile. "Relax, Lara. They're just people. You'll be fine." But even as he spoke the words, Lara could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He had always been protective of his family, especially his grandmother, who had raised him after the loss of his parents. He had told her so many times about the icy, judgmental atmosphere that often surrounded him at family events. But Lara hadn't expected to feel so out of place, so small amidst the grandeur. They entered the dining room, and the chatter died down almost immediately as heads turned to acknowledge their arrival. Alexander's family sat at an opulent table, adorned with gleaming crystal glasses and delicate china. At the head of the table sat his grandmother, the matriarch of the family. She looked every bit the dignified woman he had described, elegant, poised, and full of authority. Beside her sat his uncle, Benjamin, and his cousin, Leo, both men who had never made any attempt to hide their disdain for Alexander's less conventional approach to life. "Lara, this is my grandmother, Ruth." Alexander introduced her with a smile, his hand resting gently on Lara's back. Lara offered a tentative smile, her hand reaching out to shake the older woman's. Grandma Ruth's eyes softened as she clasped Lara's hand in her own, a warm smile gracing her face. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, dear," Grandma Ruth said in a voice that carried warmth, though there was something calculating behind her eyes that made Lara feel like she was being sized up. "Thank you for having me," Lara said, her voice steady despite the nerves churning inside her. Lara's gaze flickered around the table, and she noticed the subtle glances exchanged between the others, those not-so-subtle looks that told her she wasn't quite right for Alexander. She wasn't the type of woman they were used to seeing with him. Lara's mind began to race with insecurities. What did they think of her? What would they say once they were alone? She wasn't just some rich, polished socialite. She was an ordinary girl, an outsider, and she wasn't sure she could shake the feeling that tonight was just another reminder of how she would always be different in their eyes. As dinner progressed, The conversation remained polite but strained. Lara tried her best to contribute, but she couldn't help but feel like she was just an afterthought in the conversations that surrounded her. Everyone spoke of the latest business deals, the charitable events they had attended, and the fancy vacations they had taken. And there she was, sitting among them, feeling out of place. It wasn't just the conversation that made her feel like an outsider. It was the way they looked at her. Benjamin's eyes never left her, his sharp gaze making her feel small and inadequate. Leo, his son, seemed far more interested in keeping up appearances than in getting to know her, his casual arrogance a stark contrast to Alexander's quiet warmth. But then came the moment she had been dreading. Simone. Lara had known about Simone before. Alexander had mentioned her, briefly, in passing, his ex-girlfriend, the woman who had once been in his life, who had wanted him back. It wasn't something Lara had thought about much, but now, standing in the same room as Simone, it felt like all of her worst fears were coming to life. Simone walked into the room like she owned it, her tall, slender frame draped in a designer gown. She was every bit the woman Lara had imagined, poised, confident, and effortlessly beautiful. The way she moved was as if the world bent to her will, and the instant she saw Alexander, her eyes lit up.
Alexander,
Simone said in a voice that was smooth and silk-like, but there was something about it that made Lara's stomach churn. It was too sweet, too practiced. Lara felt a pang in her chest as Simone moved toward them, her gaze flickering briefly toward Lara before locking with Alexander's. Simone's smile widened, but there was something about the way she smiled, like she knew exactly what she was doing. "Simone," Alexander greeted her, his voice polite but distant. "I didn't expect you here."
"Oh, I just thought I'd stop by,"
Simone said, her eyes flicking between Lara and Alexander.
"It's been a while since we've all had the chance to catch up, right?"
Lara could feel the tension in the air, the way Simone's gaze lingered on her, and her stomach twisted. She had already felt like an outsider in this world, but Simone's presence made it feel all the more pronounced. She had to remind herself that Alexander was with her. He had chosen her. He had invited her to this dinner, not Simone. But as Simone leaned in closer to Alexander, the sharp words she had been biting her tongue on slipped out.
"You know, Alexander," she began, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "I didn't realize you had such different taste these days. Is this what you've settled for?"
Lara stiffened, her breath catching in her throat. She wanted to leave. She wanted to run, to escape the suffocating atmosphere that seemed to close in around her. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks as the eyes of the room turned toward her, silently judging. Alexander, to his credit, didn't flinch. His expression didn't change, and he calmly replied, "Simone, this is Lara, my girlfriend, and I'm very happy with my taste, thank you." The words sent a ripple of discomfort through the room. Lara's heart raced, a mix of gratitude and anxiety swirling inside her. She wanted to believe him, to believe that she truly mattered to him. But she still felt so out of place, so vulnerable in this world that was foreign to her. The evening wore on, but the damage had been done. Lara's mind swirled with doubts. She had thought she could handle it, thought she could meet his family and be confident in her place beside him. But Simone's interference had left her shaken, unsure of her standing in Alexander's world. As they drove home that night, the silence between them was palpable. Alexander had tried to engage her in conversation, but Lara had become distant, withdrawn. She couldn't stop thinking about Simone, about the way she had looked at her, about the way she had made Lara feel small. "Lara?" Alexander's voice was tentative, as if he knew she was upset but didn't know how to fix it. Lara sighed, her eyes staring out the window.
"I'm fine,"
she said, her voice flat. But Alexander didn't let it go. "You're not fine. What's going on?" Lara looked at him, her heart heavy.
"I just don't fit in. I don't belong in your world, Alexander.
I don't know how you can even stand to be with me. You have all this wealth, this status, and I'm just me." Alexander's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his jaw set. "Lara, that's exactly the point. I don't care about all of that. I care about you. I've never cared about any of that. It doesn't matter to me where you come from or who you were before me. What matters is what we have now." Lara's heart fluttered in her chest at his words, but the doubt still lingered. "But what about Simone? What about your family? They all think I'm nothing. They all think I'm just some distraction." "They're wrong," Alexander said firmly, glancing at her. "I'm not letting them or anyone else decide what's important in my life. I choose you, Lara. I've chosen you, and I'm not going to apologize for it." Lara swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. It was what she had always wanted, to be chosen, to be seen as more than just the circumstances of her life. And yet, her fear held her back. Could she really accept this? Could she trust him? Trust herself? When they reached her apartment, Lara paused at the door, unsure of what to say. But before she could speak, Alexander reached out, cupping her face gently in his hands. His eyes locked with hers, filled with an intensity that took her breath away. "Don't let fear decide this for you, Lara," he said softly. "You belong with me, and I'm not going anywhere." Lara's chest tightened as she looked up at him. She wanted to believe him. She had to believe him, but the road ahead was still uncertain. "Okay," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I'm ready to try." And in that moment, as the door closed behind her, she realized that the future, whatever it held, was something she was finally willing to face, with him, together. The night was clear, the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds, twinkling in their silent brilliance. The city beneath them buzzed with the usual life, but up here, on the rooftop of a posh hotel, the world felt smaller, quieter, more intimate. Lara stood beside the railing, the cool evening breeze tugging at her hair as she stared out at the view, lost in her thoughts. Everything had changed. She had changed. The girl who had once been afraid to trust, to accept help, to love, had blossomed into someone stronger, someone who could face the future without fear. It hadn't been easy. Nothing about her journey with Alexander had been smooth, but it had been worth every moment, every challenge, every tear. Her mother, Jessica, was healthy now, thriving in a way Lara had never thought possible. The weight of the medical bills was long gone, replaced by the comforting certainty that her family was no longer struggling to survive. Lara had taken back control of her life, not because of Alexander, but because of the strength he had helped her rediscover within herself. The sound of footsteps behind her broke her reverie, and she turned to find Alexander approaching, his hands in his pockets, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the city lights. There was a sense of calm about him now, an ease that hadn't been there before. He was no longer the man who needed to guard his heart at all costs. He was no longer the billionaire who lived in a world of luxury and isolation. He had learned, like her, that love wasn't about status or wealth. It was about connection, about trust, about being seen for who you truly were. And for the first time, Alexander was completely vulnerable with her, completely himself. "Hey," he said softly, stopping just a few feet away, his voice a low murmur in the quiet of the night. "You look beautiful tonight." Lara smiled, her heart lifting at the simple sincerity in his words. She had never needed to hear him say something grand or elaborate. She didn't need expensive gifts or grand gestures. She needed him to see her, to understand her. And he did, in a way no one else ever had. "Thanks," she replied, her voice steady but filled with the warmth that had become a part of her. "It's a good night." "It's the perfect night," he said, stepping closer, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. There was something in his gaze, something that made her heart skip, and for a moment, she felt the weight of everything they had gone through together, every step, every challenge, every victory. Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, his fingers trembling ever so slightly. Lara's breath caught in her throat, her chest tightening with anticipation. He dropped to one knee, his eyes never leaving hers, and the world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them in that moment. "Lara," he began, his voice rich with emotion. "From the moment I met you, my life has been turned upside down in the best possible way. You showed me what it means to truly care for someone, what it means to love without reservations, without expectations. You've been my anchor, my rock, the person who sees me for who I truly am, and for that, I am beyond grateful." Lara's heart raced as she listened, her eyes brimming with tears. Her voice was caught in her throat, but she didn't need to speak. Everything she felt was written on her face. "I don't want to live a life without you, Lara," Alexander continued, his voice thick with emotion. "You're the one I want by my side, not just for now, but for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" The words hung in the air, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Lara's mind raced, her heart full of every emotion she had felt in the past few months. She had questioned herself so many times. She had feared that she wasn't enough, that she didn't deserve someone like him. But now, standing here in front of him, she realized that love wasn't about worthiness. It was about finding someone who accepted you for everything you were, and still wanted to build a future with you. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, I'll marry you." The moment the words left her lips, Alexander's face lit up with a joy that was impossible to contain. He slipped the ring onto her finger, the cool metal feeling warm against her skin. She hadn't expected to feel this much joy, this much certainty. But as she gazed down at the ring, she knew. She had found the love she had always dreamed of. And it wasn't just in the grand gestures, the fancy dinners, or the wealth that surrounded him. It was in the quiet moments, the tenderness, the way he held her when she needed him most. Alexander stood up, pulling her into his arms, holding her tight. "I love you, Lara," he murmured into her hair. "I love you more than I've ever loved anyone." "I love you too," she whispered back, her voice soft but filled with certainty. "More than I ever thought I could." They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the city lights shining around them, marking the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. The future seemed endless now, full of possibilities they hadn't dared to imagine before. The next few weeks passed in a blur of excitement and anticipation. Lara had never imagined she would be planning a wedding, but now, with Alexander by her side, it was a dream she was eager to live. They spent hours together, selecting venues, picking out dresses, and making decisions about their life together. The process was overwhelming at times, but it was also filled with joy, joy that came from knowing they were building something real. As the wedding day drew closer, Lara found herself reflecting on the journey she had taken to get here. She thought about the lonely girl she had been, the girl who had carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. She thought about the desperate night she had spent in the hospital, the night she had met Alexander. She had come so far. She had been given a second chance at life, at love, and she wasn't going to waste it. And neither was Alexander. The day of their wedding arrived, and Lara stood before the mirror in her bridal gown, her heart racing. She couldn't believe it was happening. She couldn't believe that she, a girl from a humble background, was marrying a man who had everything. But in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was the love they shared. What mattered was the promise they had made to each other. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. They exchanged vows under the soft light of a spring afternoon, surrounded by family and friends, and when they kissed, Lara felt the weight of everything fall away. This was her moment. This was her new beginning. As they danced together later that evening, Lara looked up at Alexander, her heart full.
"This is real, isn't it?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with wonder.
"It's real," he said, his hand resting gently on her back. "It's forever." And as they swayed together under the stars, Lara knew that their love wasn't just about the past. It wasn't about where they had come from or how they had met. It was about the future they would build, hand in hand, side by side. As Lara gazed out the window that night, looking at the city lights twinkling in the distance, she thought back on everything that had led her here. From the uncertainty of her childhood to the struggles with her mother's illness, from the desperate decision that had brought her into Alexander's life to the overwhelming love they now shared. It had all been part of the journey. And now, standing at the threshold of her new life, Lara knew that no matter what obstacles they might face in the future, together, they could overcome anything. Because love wasn't about money or status. It wasn't about what they had or didn't have. It was about the connection they shared. And that was something that would last forever, the end of the story.